The guests never saw it coming. The music was already drifting across the yard, fiddles bright and careless in the summer air. When the first plate was set down, roast meats glazed and steaming, bread still warm enough to tear with bare hands. A wedding feast, meant to mark the beginning of a family's future. By nightfall, that same table would become a place of choking, convulsions, and sudden silence. And the woman who prepared every dish was standing quietly in the kitchen, hands folded, watching history tilt. This story does not survive as a neat legend. It exists in fragments, court transcripts, plantation inventories, letters written in stiff, polite ink that tried very hard not to name what had happened. In the 18th century American South, enslaved cooks were feared in a way no overseer ever admitted out loud. They handled the food. They knew the plants. They controlled the one place where every master eventually lowered their guard. The cook's name does not appear clearly in the records. That was common. Enslaved women were often listed only by first name, or not at all, referred to as the kitchen girl, even when they stood at the center of a crime that shook an entire county. What we do know is this: she was a skilled cook, trusted enough to prepare a wedding feast for one of the wealthiest families in the district, sometime in the mid-1700s, during a period when poison terrified white colonial society more than open rebellion ever could. In the decades after 1739, the year of the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina, fear sat heavy on plantations. Armed uprisings were visible, loud, and could be crushed. Poison was different. Poison was invisible. It slipped through kitchens and teacups and stew pots. Colonial newspapers whispered about it. Planters passed laws about it. Courts executed enslaved people accused of it with public urgency. In some colonies, poisoning by an enslaved person was punished more harshly than murder by any other means. The cook had been in that household for years. She rose before dawn, lit fires, butchered animals, baked bread, stirred sauces while listening to conversations not meant for her. She knew which guests preferred sweet wines, which avoided certain spices, which children stole sugar when they thought no one was watching. She also knew the garden beyond the kitchen yard, where herbs grew for flavor and medicine alike. In the colonies, African knowledge of plants survived in kitchens. Enslaved cooks blended European recipes with West African botanical memory. That knowledge kept families alive. It could also end them. The wedding was meant to be a celebration of alliance. A daughter married into another prominent family. Dozens of guests arrived by carriage and horseback. The house swelled with voices. Silverware was polished. Wine was uncorked early. The cook worked without pause. Witnesses later said she appeared calm, focused, almost reverent in her movements. What she used was not exotic. Court records from similar cases mention arsenic scraped from rat poison, crushed seeds, roots steeped into liquids. In the 1700s, many households kept poisons close at hand for vermin. No locked cabinets, no warnings. A cook had access to everything. The timing mattered. A wedding feast meant abundance, distraction, indulgence. People ate more than usual. Children were allowed treats. Servants were less closely watched. If anyone felt ill, it would be blamed on rich food or too much drink. By the time suspicion settled, it would already be too late. The first to fall were the elders. Stomach pain, vomiting. Then the bride herself, collapsing just hours after the final toast. Guests described a sudden wave of sickness spreading through the house. Some tried to leave and never made it past the yard. Others died where they sat. The scene dissolved into panic. Doctors were summoned, but colonial medicine had little to offer against poison already absorbed. By dawn, several members of the family were dead. Others followed. In the days after, the wedding never became an anniversary. It became a warning. Suspicion moved quickly toward the kitchen. It always did. The cook was arrested, questioned, and condemned in a system that did not pretend to be fair. Under interrogation, enslaved people were beaten, threatened, and coerced into confessions. Some denied everything to the end. Others confessed to crimes they did not commit simply to stop the pain. In this case, the record suggests she admitted to it. Not with hysteria, not with pleading. One account describes her as unrepentant. Another claims she said nothing at all. Why she did it is the part history tried hardest to erase. But similar cases give us clues. Enslaved cooks poisoned masters who had sold their children, raped them, beaten them, or killed family members without consequence. Poison was not random. It was targeted. It was intimate. It required patience and restraint. It required waiting until the right moment. A wedding feast was the right moment. Her execution was public. That mattered. Colonial authorities believed terror kept order. She was likely burned or hanged, depending on the colony. In some regions, enslaved poisoners were executed more brutally than others. Their deaths turned into spectacle meant to cleanse the fear they had introduced into white households. But fear does not die easily. Afterward, kitchens across the region changed. Masters watched cooks more closely. Laws restricted enslaved people's access to certain substances. Rumors spread faster than facts. Any illness could be blamed on a cook. Innocent people were accused, tried, and killed in the years that followed. Yet the deeper fear remained, that the people forced to sustain these households also held the power to destroy them. In Black oral history, these stories sometimes surface differently, not as crimes, but as warnings, as reminders that knowledge survives even under bondage. That power does not always announce itself with weapons. Sometimes it arrives quietly, seasoned, carefully, served with a smile. The wedding feast poisoning became one of those stories, whispered rather than written. Too unsettling to examine closely, too revealing. It exposed the truth plantation society wanted buried, that absolute control was an illusion, and that the most dangerous resistance was the kind no one saw coming. Even now, centuries later, the story lingers in court archives and regional folklore, stripped of names but heavy with consequence. A celebration turned into a funeral, a kitchen turned into a courtroom, and a woman history tried to reduce to a crime, standing instead as a reminder that horror does not always come from ghosts or curses. Sometimes it comes from the quiet knowledge of what people have done to you, and the moment you decide you have nothing left to lose. And the aftermath did not end with her death. It never does. In the weeks that followed the poisoned wedding, the plantation did not return to normal. It could not. The house itself became a reminder of what had happened. Windows stayed open longer than usual, as if fresh air might drive something unseen away. Meals were simpler. Guests declined invitations. The laughter that once filled the dining room vanished, replaced by cautious glances and lowered voices. The surviving members of the family lived with a new awareness that could not be undone. Every bite carried doubt. Every cup, raised to the lips, brought a pause. Trust, once broken, in that most intimate way, never fully returned. Local authorities treated the case as both crime and contagion. They feared imitation. Colonial newspapers from the period show a pattern. When one poisoning case surfaced, others soon followed, or at least accusations did. In South Carolina, Virginia, and parts of the Caribbean, enslaved people were accused of poisoning masters, overseers, neighbors, even entire households. Some cases were real. Others were paranoia dressed as justice. The fear was not unfounded, but it was exaggerated into something monstrous. Poisoning terrified slaveholding societies because it inverted the hierarchy. It proved that physical force alone did not guarantee safety. A whip could control labor, but it could not control intention. Kitchens became the soft underbelly of the plantation system. New laws followed. In South Carolina, enslaved people were restricted from gathering herbs without permission. Certain substances were locked away. Cooks were supervised more closely, sometimes forced to taste food before serving it. A ritual meant to reassure masters, but one that revealed their anxiety more than their power. Yet knowledge does not disappear simply because it is feared. African botanical traditions had already fused with European cooking and medicine. Enslaved women passed that knowledge quietly, mother to daughter, elder to younger, encoded in recipes and remedies. The same hands that healed fevers and eased childbirth also knew how to end a life. That duality unsettled colonial society deeply. What makes the wedding poisoning stand out is its symbolism. Weddings represented continuity, inheritance, the future. By striking at that moment, the act became more than revenge. It became disruption, a reminder that the future these families imagined rested on violence and exploitation, and that those foundations were not as solid as they believed. In later years, the story shifted as it was retold. White accounts framed the cook as monstrous, unnatural, possessed by evil. Black oral traditions, where they survived, spoke of suffering that had reached its breaking point. The truth likely sits somewhere uncomfortable between. She was not a mythic avenger, nor a mindless killer. She was a human being shaped by a system designed to erase her humanity. The records do not tell us if she had children. They do not tell us who taught her to cook, or who taught her which plants to use. They do not tell us what punishment she endured before the day of the wedding. Silence fills those gaps, but silence itself is evidence. It tells us whose stories were deemed unworthy of preservation. Historians studying slave resistance have long pointed out that rebellion took many forms. Not all resistance looked like chains broken or fields burned. Some resistance looked like refusal, some looked like escape, and some, very rarely, looked like poison prepared with care and patience, administered not in rage, but in resolve. The wedding poisoning became part of a broader phenomenon historians now call the poison panic. In the mid-1700s, slaveholding colonies were obsessed with the idea that enslaved people were secretly plotting to kill them. That obsession led to mass arrests, coerced confessions, and executions. In New York, in 1741, dozens of enslaved people were executed based on rumors of a poisoning conspiracy that may never have existed. Fear had become self-perpetuating. And yet, real cases like this one fed that fear. They proved that the system's worst nightmare was possible. What remains haunting is not just the act itself, but how ordinary it was made to seem in the records. A line in a ledger, a sentence in a newspaper, executed for poisoning. No reflection, no attempt to understand, just removal. But memory has a way of surviving where ink fails. In some regions, long after slavery ended, people avoided certain old houses. They spoke of kitchens where no one felt comfortable cooking, of wedding anniversaries that were never celebrated, of land that seemed to resist prosperity. Whether those stories were true mattered less than why they were told. They were echoes of guilt, fear, and unresolved violence. Today, when we look back at this story, it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about cruelty, but about agency, about what people do when all legal, moral, and social avenues are closed to them, about how horror can be born not from superstition, but from systems that leave no room for mercy. The enslaved cook did not leave behind a confession meant for us. She did not explain herself to history. She acted, and history recoiled, then moved on. But the unease remains. Because her story exposes a contradiction at the heart of the world she lived in. Those who claimed absolute power were never truly safe, and those denied all power were never entirely powerless. The wedding feast ended. The music stopped, and the house fell quiet. But the lesson lingered far longer than any celebration ever could. And perhaps that is why this story still refuses to rest.